Hello, I am Jadali Takara, and this is my grandmother, Suiko Gushikin. Actually, she's my great-grandmother, but we just call her grandma at home. She is considered a Nisei, which means she is the first generation born in Hawaii. Her parents are immigrants who were born in Okinawa, and my grandma has been through many historical events like the Plantation Era to the bombing of Pearl Harbor. My grandma married another Okinawan man named Tokuzo Gushikin and gave birth to 3 children. Our ever-growing family lives in a 4-generational home from my great-grandmother to my grandma to my mom and my auntie, and then down to my cousins, my siblings, and me. I would like to learn about the experiences my grandma has been through and her thoughts about it. Give it up for my great-grandmother, Suiko Gushikin.
Around the 1850s, many immigrants came to Hawaii to live a prosperous life and to make money for their loved ones back in their homelands. Immigrants came from all over the world, ranging from European nations like Portugal and Sweden to many Asian countries like Japan, China, and the Philippines. The driving force to bring these people together was the sugarcane plantations in Hawaii. The sugarcane was a booming business, which is what caused Hawaii to be the melting pot it is known as today.
Why and when did your parents move from Okinawa to Hawaii?
Why?
Why?
To get a better life from Okinawa. When I think it was 1887 or 1900.
Okay. And then when going to the US, I've learned in my many history classes that many people, especially those of Asian descent, were forced to change their last names in order for it to be easier for Americans to pronounce it. Were any of your family members forced to change their last names?
My oldest brother, especially, he changed from Nakandakari to Nakamura because all the rest of the siblings except me at the bottom of the totem pole last name was Nakandakari. But I went to school and had a very difficult time getting my social security because my birth certificate says I'm not Nakamura, but my last name is Nakandakari.
So there's a lot of mix-up between your last name being Nakamura and Nakandakari.
Yes, to this date.
Many women in Okinawa became picture brides for economical reasons. Did you know anyone who came to Hawaii as a picture bride?
Well, my mother-in-law came as a picture bride, but she didn't like that person, so she went in hiding and she married later on my father-in-law. My mother ran away from Okinawa to be together with her boyfriend, which was my cousin.
So since you said your mother-in-law was a picture bride, right?
Yes.
Was that rare for someone to escape or like not fully commit to being a picture bride?
From the stories I hear, yes, it was very difficult to not to marry the person because the person who sponsored her paid lots of money for her to come here.
What do you think about having a picture bride? Do you think it was necessary for the time? Would you be against it if you were in their position?
Not necessarily. If you came to picture bride, you would escape the hardship where you were actually living in Okinawa, I understand.
Since you are the first generation of our Okinawan descent, how do you feel about having an Okinawan culture in an American setting? Was it confusing to have two cultures conflicting with each other?
No, not necessarily. As I grew up, I was more on the American because I was in bottom of the totem pole by the time. The family was all American culture. But as I grew older and I had my own children, the Okinawa culture became very important to me to pass on from my parents, my great parents, great grandparents, and to my relatives who lives in Okinawa.
Do you think it affected communication at all? Like, did you wish you learned Japanese, or did you wish that you have some part of the culture here that you don't know of that's there in Okinawa?
Uh, no, no regrets. I had to learn to speak Japanese while growing up because my uncle was a Japanese school principal, and whenever he came to my house, we were told to speak Japanese to him. In the Okinawa culture, my parents, when they got together with their friends and families, they spoke in Okinawan, but it didn't bother me.
Okay, so we just talked about the immigration process, but we're gonna go more into detail about living in the plantation era. So to start off, where was your plantation home?
My plantation home was in Waipahu, amidst the sugarcane. Uh, we were the the doors were always open. The neighbors just came in and out. Yeah, and talk stories.
What experiences do you remember, or which one do you remember the most being on the plantation?
My plantation days when I was a lot younger. Well, I went where my parents went, and my father was a Sanshin player. He rather play Sanshin than go to school, which is his brother both went to college. His sister was a school teacher. He rather do uh, Sanshin. So I went whenever he got together with his Sanshin master or friends. I was always there, and I just thought that was it. It's a normal thing to do.
Did you have to personally work on the fields?
No, I was a very sickly child. I yeah, my broncho was not very strong. I was hospitalized mostly in my 9 to maybe 12, 13 years old. I was in the hospital most of the time. My friends went to work in the field. I wanted to, but because of my health, I was not able to do so.
And then in your household, what was the role of each family member?
My father worked in a plantation. My mother was, from what I call, she did work plantation. However, most of the time she was a house mom. Uh, so I remember her staying home more than going to work.
And then did your siblings help your mom with the housework as well?
Yes, my oldest brother went to college till he was 34 years old. My oldest sister, she was told to work in the field to support my brother. And she thought, I think that she obeyed my father, whatever he said. She was a very obedient person that I really respect her. She was like a mother to me because she was maybe 15 years older than I was. But respect was one of the things that I received from my parents.
Mama told me this, but your mom cooked for everyone on the plantation.
Mm. Yeah, when she first came, her job was a cook. So uh, their their homes where the bachelors stayed, workers, and she was the person that cooked meals for them.
How much people would she cook for?
Maybe about 10 to 15 people, I think.
So the amount of people in our
Yeah.
household.
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay. And then my last question is that in history class, I pretty much learned that during the plantation times, that's when you would have to cooperate with other racial groups. And so a lot of the times when that happens, you either like one more than the other, or there's some other stereotypes about the racial groups. What do you think about other racial groups during that time?
I grew up in a plantation where we were in the Japanese camp mostly. But when I went to school, there were other racial people. There were one Korean family that was very nice. I liked it. My neighbor, when I grew older, was a Chinese family. But when I went to school, there are many Filipinos. So to me, there's no racial thing that's bother me. If you're one race, it doesn't bother me. So it doesn't matter.
But did you think that your race or the Asian race was ever below like the white race in any way?
My older siblings, they felt it, but I did not feel it.
Mm.
It didn't matter.
And then so we're moving on to more of the World War II, and since we're in Hawaii, mainly on how you felt about the attack on Pearl Harbor. Do you have any memories of that day?
Yeah, that day was a Sunday, December 7th. I was from my home to the Japanese school, which we call Sunday school classes. There, as I went walking down, I saw the bombing of Pearl Harbor, and I said, "Oh, it's kind of dark and bombs are falling down." But I reluctantly went to the Japanese school. To the temple, and my cousin was one of the teachers, and she told me to go home, and I didn't know what was going on. So I saw the airplanes, the Japanese airplanes, and the pilot was just waving at us. So I said, "Oh, hi," you know. So I didn't know the bomb was falling down near my house, and so everybody was just panicking. So I just reluctantly went home, dilly-dallying, and look around people. Why are they running? And the bomb fell down not too far from where I was walking. I just walked, and my family was panicking because I was not home. And when I got home, I got third degree or whatever. And that day was the day that my oldest brother engagement was supposed to be done. So my mother's uncle and his wife and my other cousins were all there, and they were panicking. And I said, "Also, you know,
How old were you?
I think I was about 1932. Yeah, about 9 years old. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Okay, and then we're talking about aftermath when like they didn't know or Americans didn't know who to trust. Because a lot of American Japanese were sent to camps. So since you're Okinawan and you're grouped into mainly Japanese, because some people don't know the differences, did any like Americans view your family differently?
I didn't feel it because that's 9 years old. Everybody's same. It doesn't matter. Even today, it doesn't matter. What you think, but I think as I grew older, there were prejudice going around. Uh, you know, the you live in Hawaii, the Hawaiians don't care for the white men because they had their reasons. My relatives went to the 442, well-known, war. My husband just missed that, so he went to Korean War. So did my brother. But they felt some prejudice, but I didn't feel any prejudice.
Okay. And then, what were your thoughts on the aftermath of the attack? Like that you processed that everyone was panicking, even though you weren't.
Uh, my father was very strict in doing things. When he says something, we just listened. Uh, Panic-wise, maybe my older siblings said, but I didn't panic because
You were too young.
yeah, what is that to be panicked about? You know.
Oh, you must have lived the greatest life during that time.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I guess this is where Grandpa comes in because we're going to talk about the Korean War, which was roughly right after World War II.
Mm-hmm.
So the only thing I'm pretty much aware of was that Grandpa served in the military during the Korean War, right?
Yes.
And so what were the reasons why he wanted to join the war?
He didn't join. He was drafted because he was supposed to be drafted with the Go for Broke. In the 442, but then because he was so-called the breadwinner of the house, they deferred him. But then during the Korean, right after the war was over, the Korean War came and they needed more people, so he was drafted in Korean War.
And then can you go into specifics of what do you know of like what he did during the war, what his job was?
From what I gather, reading some books, he didn't want to talk about it. So anything about Korea, he just didn't want to talk about it. But I understand he was so-called foot soldier. Went in the front to scout where the enemies were. But in the later years, because of his knowledge in good Japanese, so transferred to Tokyo, and he was in the group of interrogating the Chinese officers or Korean officers that was captured. That was his main job, to translate from whatever Chinese to Korean that he was able to read. Yeah. But then after the war, when he came, he was working for Harbor when the ship from Chinese docked at Pearl Harbor. He was called to translate what the Chinese are saying. He did pretty good understand, but the higher ups in the American officers didn't quite understand what he was saying because he was talking Pidgin language. They were so frustrated because of his Pidgin language. American, but to him,
It was normal English.
Normal English.
Okay. How was Grandpa viewed, especially since he was Okinawan, by his peer soldiers? I guess.
Uh, to him, I guess, uh, it doesn't matter. It didn't matter what kind of person you were. I mean, from what I gather, because he was a very friendly type and he talked to anybody who would talk to him. Yeah. And he liked the language that he really enjoyed himself. He didn't know too many about Okinawan language, Okinawan culture, until he got married to me. Then we went to Okinawa thing. But in the meantime, he liked to talk to a lot of Filipinos because he was very good in Spanish, and they would talk and laugh, and I give him the stink eye because I didn't know what they were talking about.
Do you have any memories of the Korean War yourself?
The Korean War, the only thing that I remember was my girlfriend's brother died during the war time, and it was one of the saddest things that I can remember, going to his funeral. You know. not knowing what to say or how to say. But when my brother was uh, inducted in the Korean War, it was very scary because immediately, even the neighbor, next door neighbor, because he wouldn't write home and we didn't know what happened to him. But for several months, for long months, he finally wrote and said that he caught some kind of sickness that he was not able to write home or let us know. So to this day, he still goes to understand. My sister-in-law tells me he still get up and yell at whoever, or he just punching the person, you know, and he pulls, they don't know what it was about, but he still dream about the Korean War. I mean, the enemy that he had to kill or be killed, which my husband didn't have to go through that.
So he had PTSD then.
Yeah, I think he still does, but daytime he's very normal, but nighttime, my sister-in-law said he gets every so often, even to this day.
And then, so we're heading to our last topic of this interview, and it's mainly about now, like about our Okinawan history and our heritage and how we celebrate it now. And so, currently, there may be many misconceptions made about Okinawans. So, I know one of them is that I've heard it's like Okinawans are Japanese and people can't distinguish the differences between them. And so, how do you feel about that?
When my siblings were growing up, I understand they were looked down that they are Okinawans. The Japanese, they were higher than, I didn't experience that because my good friend is not Okinawan. We grew up together. Uh, so, but there were a lot of, I understand, discrimination going on. But during high school, my father uh, wanted me to continue the Okinawa language and culture. So that's when I started doing Okinawa culture and learn more about Okinawan thing. But when I went to Okinawa to first time to visit my brother who was stationed there, I met my husband's cousin and my cousin. When I went there, they're so friendly. My husband's cousin would come and say, "Oh, I'll pick you up at 8 o'clock." But my cousin said, "Oh, he come at 8 o'clock," so he came 7 o'clock to pick me up. Then I was gone. But that's when I started learning more about the culture. Find my relatives, which I did. Meet my first cousin. My with my first cousins, a lot of them. My aunt was still alive. 1, 2, 3 aunties were still alive. But I didn't know about uh, I didn't know about my uncle folks, but that's where I found my side. Then I researched and found my Wishkin side, which they now, that's my husband's first cousin. The position that they have in Okinawa was very high. My father's side is mostly education. We had a lot of education from generation to generation. They call it the karma. Yeah, my father's side. Yeah, on my husband's side, they were very. I understand years, so maybe 7 generations ago. Uh, this person had only one daughter, and in the line of princess, and because the princess cannot carry the load, one of my husband's relatives generations ago went to marry that person. So my husband's last name is supposed to be Kinjo, I understand, but he took the name of Pushkin or on the women's side. So there's a lot of history that my younger, my children, doing some research on that. The, you know, where the Pushkin come from and where the Nakama come from, and they are so-called not not farmers, but mostly on the education side.
Um, Maybe at Okinawa or even over here at Hawaii, how would you describe the relationship between Okinawans, or how do you think they treat people overall?
Okinawans are very friendly people, like the Hawaiians over here. That's what I compare to. To me, they're okay because, but only the locally here, the Hawaiians, they have the Hawaiian language going on. It's very, I really appreciate like that. The culture is coming back, like the people. In Okinawa, the dancers are coming back, the language are coming back, but it's not as fast as I want them to learn Okinawan language. In Hawaii, I think that the people of Okinawa, with the Okinawan background, know more about Okinawa culture than what I experienced when I went to Okinawa. About Okinawa children know about the culture. They are trying very best, but in Hawaii, the Okinawa community is so great. So I want my children, my grandchildren, to embrace that, to be no prejudice, do the best they can. But there is some prejudice, I would say. It's not 100%, but there is prejudice going on that must be worked on.
And then you said that in Hawaii, at least we're trying to restore our culture. We are successfully bringing hula back and our Hawaiian language back. Why do you think it's taking a little bit longer for Okinawans to restore their culture?
Uh, History says that in Okinawa you can't speak after the war. You cannot speak Okinawan language like how I one time was. They're still under the jurisdiction of Japan, so Japan is still saying that they don't really recognize the Okinawan language. They're trying their best to bring the Okinawan language, however, they are under Japan rule. Or Japanese language is more, you know, higher than whatever. Although they're trying their very best, but hopefully one day that Okinawan language will be secondary, like the Hawaiians are learning to bring the culture back.
I feel like you touched a little bit about this already, but how do you try to keep your Okinawan culture alive?
I try to tell my children and my grandchildren to get active in Okinawa culture thing that they do sometimes to participate in the uh, whatever Okinawa thing they have, and they are sort of cooperating to do whatever they can. So to keep that. But I think my husband will be so proud that the kids are continuing their culture little by little.
Little by little. So one way my grandma makes me, or passes the culture on to me, is that she makes us volunteer annually at the Okinawan Festival. And so some context behind that, the Okinawan Festival is held once a year. It's one of the biggest festivals in Hawaii. Many Okinawans join, but also a lot of other locals come as well. And so, leading on, why do you think the Okinawan Festival is so valuable?
Culture, for one thing, and to show the people, uh, you know, uh, like my older siblings, when the Okinawans are just as human. Whatever, it doesn't. The skin doesn't matter. Culture doesn't matter. It's all togetherness. But culture-wise, I think Okinawa is so beautiful. I've been to Okinawa several times. I think all my children has come to, all my grandchildren except one has gone to Okinawa to learn. about Okinawan language and to meet their relatives. So hopefully, if I'm still here, my great grandchildren will be able to go one of the same which Kobe did already. But yeah.
Okay. And then, why do you think, out of all the cultures in Hawaii, Okinawan Festival is one of the most celebrated festivals?
Because everybody help each other. They don't say it's my stuff. The thing is saying it's our thing, because of the hardship they went, and the parents went hardship, they remember that, and the difficulties they themselves are going up. To them, oneness is togetherness. That's what the Okinawan people feel. To me, that's what they feel. It doesn't matter whether you're other racial or not, but because they like to help each other, don't have to get paid for it, but do for the humanity for one thing, and bring the culture back and keep it alive, what the ancestors left for us.
So, in other words, they are very teamwork or team oriented, and they really appreciate what the past did for them.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
After interviewing my grandma, something I took away was that you should respect your elders, ancestors, and history. My grandma has been through many tragic events and worked really hard to create the luxury my family lives in today. My heritage and culture is a big part of my identity, so to respect my history, my ancestors, and my culture, I should try my best to preserve and remember it. One way I preserved my culture was in high school when I asked my JROTC unit to volunteer at the Okinawan Festival. Seeing them dancing and enjoying my culture was thrilling. Not only did it help distinguish that Okinawans are different than Japanese, but it also proves that our culture is strong and will make a comeback. I am glad I had this opportunity with my grandma and hope to go to Okinawa in the future so that I can continue to learn about my culture.
Everybody has their own culture. To me, the culture should be alive in whatever nation you come from. If you're in America, if your culture is German, keep the German culture, or Italian culture, or English culture, or whatever culture. That's where people can understand what your culture is all about and appreciate your ancestors especially.
Well, I think that's it. Thank you
You're welcome.
for coming or having this interview with me.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, say bye.
Bye bye. Take care.